da Universidade da Catânia. Então, esse projeto comum que temos em conjunto, o professor Caranti vai explicar um pouquinho para vocês, que chama Kant na América do Sul, e faz parte de um consórcio de pesquisadores de 8 universidades, 4 universidades europeias, 4 universidades sul-americanas, e no Brasil, o UFMG e Santa Catarina. Então, esse curso do professor Caranti abre a primeira atividade desse projeto, que é um projeto de cooperação, e que da UFMG fazem parte eu, a professora Georgia e a professora Virginia. E para nós aí é um grande prazer apresentar o professor Luigi, que é professor, então ele é um estudioso do Kant. Aqui a gente trouxe 2 livros importantes do professor Luigi, esse Kant, o escândalo da filosofia, que é uma discussão sobre o ceticismo cartesiano, e esse que é o objeto do curso de vocês, que é o legado político do Kant, e que vocês devem ter recebido esse livro em PDF. Então, a gente vai ter 3 dias de um curso intenso, né? Não precisa finalizar até 1 hora, porque vai depender um pouco do fôlego. Mas teremos, então, um intervalo no meio, e para dar um break, depois a gente retoma as atividades. Mas, Luigi, for us, it's a very, very pleasure to introduce you and to welcome you here in our university. Thank you very much for coming, and you can begin your...
Right. Thank you all for organizing this, for being partners in this project, and thank you for the students for the present. I apologize, I am not falo Portuguese. I'd like to. I love Portuguese. My friends know that I love Portuguese, and I understand Portuguese because I'm Italian, but I'm very bad with active knowledge so far, so I'll have to speak in English. I can receive questions in Portuguese. I think I'll be able to understand them. If you're not comfortable in asking questions in English, that's perfectly okay. Okay, so let me thank once again my colleagues Patricia, Georgia, and Virginia for organizing this secondment, that's the way it's called in the European language, what I'm doing here within this project, and in particular for organizing this mini course that gives me the opportunity to present to you the things I've been studying lately in my research. What I would like you to receive in general from this course is an introduction to the philosophy of human rights. So you will not become expert neither in human rights nor in the philosophy of human rights, but you will be introduced to the debate by following this course. That's my goal, at least. Let's hope that this happens. If you like it and if you want to go deeper, I am at your disposal. I mean, I'm always reachable through email, even if I'm not around. If you want to read more, if you want to go deeper in some of the themes that we will be touching on, that's perfectly okay. Just write to me. I'll be happy to share with you new materials, new papers that allow you to focus on one of the problems you might want to focus on. Human rights and violence, human rights and humanitarian interventions, human relationship between human rights and democracy. Is democracy human rights? Is dignity the foundation of human rights? Which is pretty much the only theme we are going to dig a little bit more deeper in this course, among the many. Because as you might know, human rights was not a subfield or the subject of any course until 30 years ago. And it's James Nigel, that this philosopher of law, still living and active, I think he's at the University of Miami right now, who made human rights into a subfield of political philosophy. So it's of course a theme that cuts across different disciplines, obviously law, international law, humanitarian law, but it is through James Nigel, I guess, that this became a concern for political philosophy in its own right. Right now, there is a huge literature on not only on human rights, but also on the philosophy of human rights. it is by now an established subdiscipline. Okay, so this is the goal I would like to reach through these 3 long meetings. Let's hope that we will survive. Before I start with today's introduction to the contemporary debate, I would like to say something more about this project that brought me here, and then that will bring your professors to Europe very soon, because one of the things that is going to happen soon in this project is this colloquium we'll have in Catania, the contemporary world. All the people involved in the project, in the Cantenza project, will be present, more or less. So this project, as Patricia already said, is an initiative of 4 European universities: University of Catania, that is coordinating the project, London School of Economics, the Martin Luther Universität Halle-Wittenberg, and the University of Lisbon. That's the European side. The Southern American side, Cantenza, South America, is the 2 Brazilian universities Patricia already mentioned, and 2 Argentinian institutions, the CONICET and the University of Buenos Aires. So it's a network of Kant scholars, basically, and the main goal of the project is to, for us Europeans, to learn the way in which Kant is read, studied, interpreted in South America, and perhaps also for Southern American scholars to know more about what we do right now, the latest developments of Kant scholarship in Europe. As you may know, I guess you know, the Brazilian scholarship, especially in Kant, has developed exponentially in the last 20 years. I don't know whether this was planned, it was the result of some political reforms that affected the university at large, but it's certainly the case that the quality, I myself, I've been coming to Brazil the last 10 years, more or less, maybe more. I have noticed a dramatic increase in the quality of the scholarship, so it is our interest to know more about what our Southern American colleagues do. And also, one of the goals of the project is to establish lasting connections between institutions. So we have to make our best effort to have this going also besides the 4 years that the project is articulated on. What else can I say about the project? You have some more details here. One thing I'd like to say is that the scheme, these are the university, wow, how efficient. I noticed that there was a mistake because there was not the right logo of the Universidad Federal de Minas Gerais. This morning, 1 hour ago, and I sent a message to the web designer, said, look, it's wrong, and it has already been corrected. I'm very glad. You don't want to have the wrong logo of the institution. You talk right. It's not the right logo.
Right color.
But at least it's the right,
yes.
Main. First it was the CONICET logo, so, okay. You give me the logo, because I couldn't find it in the website. So I can give it to the guy who takes care of the website. Okay, so one thing I'd like to say is something about the Marie Curie schemes in general. I don't know how familiar you are with Marie Curie grants. This project is funded through a Marie Curie RISE. RISE stands for Research and Innovation Staff Exchange. And this scheme is reserved, as the name suggests, for the secondments and therefore exchange of different scholars, either at the international level, like in this case, international meaning Europe plus the rest of the world, or within Europe. So one of the Marie Curie grants that one can apply for. There are many Marie Curie grants for individuals that you could be interested in, because one of the common mistakes is to think that Marie Curie grants are reserved to European citizens. This is not right. Most of them are open also to non-Europeans, so it is your interest to look into the many possibilities that the Marie Curie schemes at large offer. For example, one of the most common schemes is the so-called, it used to be called, maybe they changed their name, but anyway, it's the intra-European fellowship. It means that it's a scheme that funds individual researchers to go 2 years and do research in one of the European institutions. Again, this is not reserved to Europeans. So if you want to go and study in Germany, in Italy, in France, in the United Kingdom, you have to be quick because they're leaving, as you know. If you want to go to Europe and study, this is a scheme that is appealing to you. These are very generous grants. You won't have economic problem for 2 years, I can assure you that. And they are competitive, but not incredibly competitive. Let's put it this way. So the most competitive scheme is the Global Fellowship, that is a fellowship to go from Europe abroad. In that case, the 8% of the applications are retained for funding. And this is the most competitive. The intra-European one has a success rate of about 11%. So it is competitive, but it's 1 out of 10. There are many different schemes that are much more competitive than that. So, I mean, think about it. If you are planning to go abroad and study, this could be an opportunity. I act as an ambassador for Marie Curie grants because I chair the Italian chapter of the Marie Curie Alumni Association. That is an association of people who have already gotten this degree. I have won 4 Marie Curie fellowships in my career, so I think I have a rather extensive expertise in telling you how to get one. Again, if you're interested in knowing more, I'd be more than happy to share with you details of the different possibilities that you have, and if you decide to apply, on how to make the best application to increase your chance of success. Okay? Well, that's more or less. Let me show you, so that I can say something better about my colleagues here, who have not yet turned in their photo and biography, although they were asked long ago to do so. So if you don't see their pictures here, it's really their fault. But that's actually a very small subset of the participants, because we are more than 40 scholars in this scheme. So it's a lot of people. Am I right? 40? No, 30. I exaggerated a little bit. We are around 30. Okay, now I think I had opened my Dropbox. I'm no longer sure. Yes. Let's go to the topic of the course. I don't know the level of your English, so I thought that for the first lecture, which is today, I'm going to read the chapter that I wrote in my book for introducing the contemporary debate on human rights. You have the PDF, so you can go back anytime to it. I'm going to comment a little bit what I wrote, so that we don't fall asleep after half an hour, because I find myself very boring. So, and reading out loud myself is extremely boring. So I'll try to cheer it up a little bit as much as I can. But I thought that it was not an extremely bad idea, because even if you are not strong in English you will be introduced and you will find easy to follow. I hope, given the substantial amount of time at our disposal, that you will participate with me in the lecture, which means that you will ask questions, that you will stop me and everything, and we will relieve the burden of speaking for 3.5 hours. So I count on you. You can interrupt me anytime while I'm reading and discussing, and I'm going to reserve at least 1 hour, 1.5 hours at the end of the class, 1 hour, let's say, for having a general discussion about what we did. But this is not an alternative to clarificatory questions that you may have as I go on reading. Okay? Okay, so, well, before I start reading, let me actually ask you, what do you think the philosophy of human rights is about? If you have a sort of prejudgment in the good sense, a prejudice in the good sense of the word, what do we study if we want to do philosophy of human rights?
I think it's, I don't know, the first impression is that about the foundations of human rights, something like this, searching for foundations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, certainly when we talk about the foundation of human rights, what we basically mean is what is the basis of their normativity. I mean, why do we think that humans have rights just in virtue of their belonging to a species? That's clearly an important philosophical question, but it's not the only one that we can have. For example, another important question is, what rights are human rights? Not all rights are human rights, obviously. So which of the many rights one may think we have are human rights? So what is the difference between the rights that a state, even a liberal democracy, gives us and human rights? Are they fewer, more, are different, or why do we think that the sovereignty of states stops the moment in which states violate human rights? And does that make apparent a possible tension between human rights and democracy? I mean, if a people decides that it's okay to torture terrorists for the sake of security, who are we, and we being the international community, to say that they are wrong and that terrorists should not be tortured? So if that is the case, you see that there is already a potential conflict between this idea of democracy, understood as, in a very minimal sense, as the law that the people gives to itself, and the culture of human rights. So we are going to focus on the foundation of human rights in this course, but I don't want you to think that the foundational issue is the only issue that we may have when we do philosophy of human rights. Okay, so I'll start here. So human rights play a crucial role in contemporary politics. That's an evident truth. They are a lingua franca, that is a universal language that allows representatives of different worldviews to have a common basis of shared values. They inspire activism around the world and set limits to the sovereignty of states. Notice the first characteristic, this idea of being a universal language. When you do human rights, when you think of human rights, you're not thinking about your own moral perspective, you're not thinking about a moral perspective that is okay only for a part of the world, but it's supposed to be something that everybody understands, everybody agrees on. And this itself is a philosophical problem, because usually when we do moral theory, we look for the truth. At least if you are a Kantian. You look for the truth, you don't care if other people agree. If you think that you hit on the truth, that's all that matters, right? Whereas when you do human rights, it's not exactly like that. I mean, you may have your own strong belief in what the moral truth is, and believe that human rights should not perfectly overlap with that moral truth, because you know that that truth is not going to be accepted by different cultural contexts. So another interesting philosophical issue is the relation between truth and human rights. As you know, with Rawls, even political philosophy and truth went a little bit apart from one another. I mean, political liberalism explicitly says this book is not about the truth in political philosophy, it's about the best reconstruction that we can give of a certain cultural context, and spelling out of principles that are in reflective equilibrium with this kind of political culture. But this separation between truth and philosophy is even more evident when you talk about human rights, for the reason that one of the main objections to the whole human rights culture is the fact, of which I'm sure you have already heard of, that human rights tend to be parochial. And by parochial we mean that they are okay for the West, they are sort of new instruments of the Western imperialism. We go there with this idea of individual rights, self-government, separation between religion and state, women's rights, equality between women and men, equality of religions, and so on and so forth. And this is, just a legacy of the Enlightenment. This is the legacy of the religious wars in Europe. That's how we organize our political life. But why should other parts of the world do the same? Okay, so this idea of being a universal language is a common preoccupation when you do the philosophy of human rights. So the importance of human rights has many reasons, one of which is particularly intriguing. They are an authentic novelty in the history of human reflection on the universal rules that should govern each and every agent. In fact, no earlier attempt to turn moral claims into norms governing politics even resembles what human rights are doing in our world. Certainly, a tendency towards universal acceptance was built into all major metaphysical and religious worldviews. Think of the universal element built into the very etymology of Catholicism, being Catholic. Catholic means universal, as you know. Or of the inborn tendency of all major religions to speak the truth about fundamental matters. Nonetheless, no preceding set of ideas has aspired to become the common normative language of mankind, and that's the novelty, independently of the metaphysical or religious substratum on which it rested. So, in the history of ideas, we already have seen many attempts of speaking the universal truth about morality, but it's the first time that we see the same attempt run without an appeal to a deep philosophical foundation, without being committed to a specific metaphysics, to a specific ontology, not to mention to a specific religion. Okay? So that's the novelty. We want a universal language, a normative universal language, but we want this language as detached, as independent as possible of deep metaphysical roots. So human rights today are the hope that we can start from very different assumptions about the ultimate truth about morality, life, philosophy, and so on and so forth, and still reach common norms to govern the way we should treat each other. Even if our religious, philosophical, and moral views vary significantly and have the potential to lead to conflict, we can still resort, in case of deep disagreement, to the language of human rights to find agreement. or at any rate a shared basis for dialogue. So that's the importance of human rights, one of the dimensions of the importance of human rights today. By virtue of this ambition, human rights performed the function that made them vital even outside the relatively small circles of academics and politicians. This was imposing a limit on national sovereignty and giving the international community, whatever that is, I never understood exactly what the international community is, authority to intervene in countries' domestic affairs. All major occurrences of political violence after the fall of the Berlin Wall, so from Rwanda to Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Sudan, Libya, Mali, and now again Libya, as you know, have been conceptualized in the language of human rights violation, triggering a demand for action by national and international bodies through the intervention of single external states or by a coalition, with or without the endorsement of the UN. Since virtually all states accept the authority of human rights, at least on paper, at least officially, there is no, you won't hear any head of state today in the world saying, fuck human rights, I don't care about human rights or stuff like that. Human rights are just, you know, there may be a few dictators here. No, I'm not, no, don't get me wrong.
Something similar to that.
Well, I know that there is, this argument that human rights have to be balanced against the security of citizens in Rio, right? Didn't they make this argument? But it's very rare, let's put it this way. Independently of what the politicians or people in power do to other people, they will never or very rarely officially say, I don't care about human rights or human rights are wrong or stuff like that. So officially everybody agrees about human rights. No one dares to say, no, my race is more entitled than your race to have rights, or just because I'm a man I have more rights than you because you are a woman or stuff like that. So this is an interesting phenomenon that there is no explicit disagreement about human rights in international politics. So these more or less serious forms of interference in domestic affairs by the international community have been ipso facto legitimized. So even governments that were barely sincere in their homage to human rights regretted binding themselves to such a strategy. Once you bind yourself to human rights, then you attract on you possible criticism of other states. So vice paid a high price virtue in those cases. And another feature of human rights is worth mentioning, I think. They limit the right, that's something that I already mentioned, they limit the right each people has to give laws to itself. Although one hardly hears this point in academic discussions, a little bit more now, it should be clear that human rights compete with the dominant value of our times, that is democracy, are not just the other face of democracy. They are in competition with democracy. They compete with the value of democracy. At least that's the way I see it. And in fact, lately, in the book that I sent you, the edited work by Kruft, Liao, and Renzo on human rights, there is a nice discussion of the relationship by Cristiano on the relationship between human rights and democracy. I myself wrote something about it. So there is now more attention to this theme, but it shouldn't be that difficult to see that human rights and democracy are not the same thing. Actually, to the extent in which there are external limits to the political will of each people, they tend to be in tension with the value of democracy. So if we take human rights seriously, communities do not have an unlimited right to self-determination. They have this right, and specific human rights protect just that possibility, but with well-defined limits, not democratically determined. Okay? Okay, so given the fundamental rule,
Tem que deixar aberto, sabe, porque uma pessoa sair para ir ao banheiro.
maybe you want to put a shirt?
História. Não, é pouquinho.
So, given the fundamental role human rights play in politics and for the lives of millions of people around the world, it is hardly surprising that not only scholars but also politicians and common citizens still feel the need to reflect on what grounds their normativity. We are going to focus on this foundational question. Now, how have philosophers responded to this burgeoning request for clarification about the foundation of human rights? What arguments have they offered, at least recently, to those who believe in human rights but would like to get a better grasp on the reasons why we have them? You can believe in human rights and do not understand exactly why we have human rights, and it's a legitimate question to get some more clarity on the foundation. More importantly, how did they respond, philosophers, how did philosophers respond to those who are not convinced that human rights should be the ultimate tribunal of what a people can or cannot do? Well, this is more or less the state of the play. I wrote this book 1 year ago, so it's not that old. I think this, what I'm going to say, still applies to today. Philosophers have reached no unified account, and that's okay, because there is no unified account in philosophy, as we know. It's not surprising. What is more worrying is that while the culture of human rights around the world gains momentum, so there is rising activism, and as I said, there is a widespread consensus on human rights across culture, de facto people agree about human rights. Philosophers are not capable of finding an explanation of this increasing agreement about these normative standards. And certainly it is unclear that these improvements have come by virtue of the philosophical work that has been done so far. In other words, it is unclear that any skeptic of human rights has become less skeptical because philosophy has provided a good account of the normative force of these rights. And if you think that philosophy should not change the minds of skeptics around the world, there is nonetheless room to say that philosophy has not even clarified the terms of the discussion. The confusion has reached so high a peak that a leading scholar in the field, James Griffin, has recently felt the need to step back from substantive questions to reach a meta perspective. So philosophers have started asking themselves the question, not what is the foundation of human rights, but what should the foundation of human rights amount to? So in this sense, it's a meta question. John Tasiulas, who is probably the philosopher today who most professionally talk about human rights, recently published a paper again on this meta question. What should the foundation of human rights look like, not what is the foundation of human rights? And so before Tasiulas, Griffin asks, what are we philosophers, political theorists and jurisprudents trying to do when we talk about human rights? Alan Buchanan, another important scholar, recently asked, what is a philosophical theory of human rights? Not to mention Joseph Russ, who has a clear answer and simply thinks that human rights have no foundation, so the answer is straightforward in that case. So the main question about human rights today, from a philosophical perspective at least, is in full force, remains in full force. How do we know that human rights are not simply the invention of well-meaning minds shocked by the brutality of the Second World War, the Holocaust, and the various horrors of totalitarian regimes? How do we know that they are what they promise to be ultimate standards with cross-cultural universal validity? And how do we know whether the list of human rights we have in the main documents, Universal Declaration, the international treaties from the 60s, and so on, is the correct list. Namely, it includes those rights that are to be considered as human rights. Maybe we should have a shorter list, and now there is the common example here of a human right that many people think should not be a human right. Is it really the case that everyone has a human right to rest and leisure, including holidays with pay, as famously stated by Article 24 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Most people, not everyone, but most people think that human rights are about guaranteeing basic stuff. So the fact that you're not treated, the fact that you're not tortured, the fact that you don't starve, the fact that you count something in the political process of decision making in your political community, but not that you have to have holiday with pay. That's nice. Nice, and perhaps no. There is a very important. There is a very serious scholar at Columbia who wrote an article trying to defend the fact that the holiday with pay is a human right, making the argument that if you are not allowed ever to go on holiday, your life is quite miserable. Now, it's a serious argument, but the majority of the people think that the drafters of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights were a little bit too generous here with Article 24. But
Unrealistic.
a little bit utopian, yes. And what about the human rights to the highest? This one is even better, I think, and this comes from the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. A human right to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental well-being. Sure. And what about the less famous case of ambitious rights such as Article 27, first paragraph, again of the Universal Declaration, which reads, everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and to share in the scientific advancement and its benefits. Yes, again, how miserable would be a life in which I am so poor that I have to work every day, every 10 hours a day, and I don't have time to share the benefits of the arts, of the scientific advancement. You do hear the Università na Praça. Actually, I read the last time. It was very the real as a philosophical question. I like it very much. So, of course, it's important. It's debatable whether these goods should be made those protected by human rights. We think they are after more basic stuff. So, questions about the proper list and nature of human rights are logically distinct. That's the first point I made today from the foundational question. So, I invite you not to conflate these different questions. It's easy to show that they are independent. Let's assume that you have a compelling argument that shows, one, that humans have dignity, and B, that humans are entitled to certain rights by virtue of that dignity. These results are going to influence what you say about the proper list and nature of human rights, but obviously more philosophical work needs to be done to come up with an account of which rights should be conceived as an essential protection of human dignity, and to answer the question about the nature of human rights. So, I'm not saying that the answer you have to the question of what is the foundation of human rights is not going to influence the question about what is the proper list of human rights or what is the nature of human rights. Of course, it's going to influence, but it's more philosophical work needs to be done to move from your idea of what the foundation is to the answers to these different questions. Again, the foundational answer you adopt is going to impact greatly on the other two questions, and more importantly, though, it enjoys a logical priority over them. Why is the foundational question logically prior to the question of the proper list or to the question of the nature of human rights? Well, in my mind at least, while it is conceivable, as in the example that I gave above, that one comes up with an answer to the foundational question while still remaining uncertain or non-committal with regard to the other two, so you can be certain that dignity is the foundation of human rights, but you can still be uncertain what dignity implies in terms of these are the human rights we need, the nature of human rights is to do this and that, to perform this and that function, but not others. It's rather difficult to see the other way around. So it would be bizarre to submit an account of the nature and proper list of human rights and remain fully silent on why human rights are not the sheer invention of well-meaning minds. So it seems to me that the foundational question has a logical priority because it's difficult to conceive of someone who comes to you and says, oh, I have a great theory of exactly which rights should count as human rights. But I have no idea whatsoever why human rights should be taken seriously. That's quite bizarre. Whereas the other way around sounds more acceptable. I have a good philosophical theory about what the foundation of human rights is. And I still don't know for sure what we should infer from this foundation. Okay? So, both for reason of space and for its logical priority, in what follows, we are going to focus on the foundational question. And in the remaining part of the chapter, I'm going to reconstruct the contemporary foundational debate, highlighting strengths and weaknesses of the three, because there are three main orientations today in the philosophy of human rights, if we focus on this question of the foundation. So, what are these three main orientations? The so-called justification deficit is so acutely felt among philosophers that a voluminous publication devoted to the foundational problem has recently appeared. It's the one I gave to you, with contribution by the most authoritative scholars. Here the different accounts are divided into three main groups that by and large overlap an earlier partition offered by John Tasiulas in reductive, orthodox and political views. We now have, in the language of this new book, instrumental justification that correspond to the reductive category of Tasiulas, non-instrumental justification that correspond to the orthodox category of Tasiulas, and practice-based justification, which correspond to the political view. Now I'm going to explain why. Let us introduce the essential of these three approaches with a few critical notes that should suffice to explain why, in my modest opinion at least, none of them provides a convincing foundation. That's also why you want to write a book about human rights, because you are not satisfied with what's already out there. Okay, so that's really the center of today's class. I want you to be crystal clear on what these three different orientations are. Okay, so in terms of sheer information that I'm passing to you, that's what you should get from today's class. Okay, what is an instrumentalist approach to human rights? Instrumentalists, let's call them this way, think of human rights as useful means to realize certain features of human lives that are taken as self-evidently valuable and worthy of protection. So everybody has a pretty good idea of what it's important to have a good life. Human rights are simply the things that protect these things that we need to have an acceptable, if not good, or very good life. So So instrumentalism in the sense that human rights are instruments for having a decent or good life. Okay? When it comes to specify, though, what these features are, three different answers are suggested within instrumentalism. Some think that it's agency, the feature in question, it's agency what makes our life worthy, what makes our life acceptable. Why agency? What's so important about agency? Well, the idea that unless it's you who steers the life you have, nothing has value. I mean, very intuitively, it's always up to you to decide that you enjoy freedom, that you enjoy certain material goods, but it has to be through your choice, your ability to choose these goods that confers on them the value that we think they have. So others, though, other instrumentalists deny that there is one single good that is the basis of human rights and opt for a plurality of goods central to human life. Thirdly, the capability approach that developed by Sam and Nussbaum insists on human rights point of securing what they call capabilities. Capabilities are not material goods, but are real opportunities for individuals to realize certain functions. So notice, capabilities are halfway between material goods and sheer freedom. They are real opportunities. What is the bridge? The bridge is that Sen and Nussbaum think that the quality of a political system has to be measured in terms of how many capabilities it offers to people who live there. And capabilities are real opportunities to do what you think is important for you. So it's not just having the abstract freedom to go to the university, but also to have the real possibility to go to the university. Just to give the most obvious example, so in this sense there are halfway between material goods and freedoms. So mental and bodily health is another example. In order to have a mental and bodily healthy life, you don't need merely the possibility of not eating junk food, but you also need to have the possibility of having the resources of buying good food in order to have a mental and healthy good life. So within instrumentalists you find these three different main approaches. One focused on agency, one that we could call pluralist, and the other one is the capability approach. Now let's see something more about each of them. Agency, so the capacity to act on chosen, self-chosen, self-picked, self-imposed ends, is both something that humans tend to value highly in itself and something that distinguishes us from other animal species, because one of the many things we need to do when we do philosophy of human rights is to show and prove that we are entitled to assign to ourselves rights that we are not ready, that we think is right not to give to animals. What are human rights speciesist, to use Peter Singer's famous category? I mean, are we racist against other species? We could say in claiming human rights and saying we are entitled to these rights, but we don't think that dogs, monkeys, cats are. So we need an answer to that, obviously. So agency usually is what is offered as an answer, among other things, to explain why we are entitled to have a special treatment for humans compared to other species. Why? Because usually people think that the amount of self-control that we have on our lives that's the way in which it's usually framed, the issue, is much higher, if not completely absent, much higher than in other species where some people think is completely absent, some other think is developed to a considerably lesser degree. Okay, so the most authoritative exponent of this orientation, that the one that focuses on agency, is James Griffin, who wrote in 2008 this On Human Rights that had a huge impact on the discipline. Now, Griffin thinks that human rights protect human dignity by affording humans the means necessary to exercise their capacity for agency. So, the argument is quite straightforward. Human rights protect the instruments we need in order to steer our lives according to our choices. We are not agent unless we are given these goods that human rights protect. And since agency is the most important value, human rights ipso facto are justified because they protect what is most important for us. Very nice, no? Except that it doesn't work. Because no matter how appealing agency-based justifications of human rights, they encounter serious difficulties. The major problem, which was already noticed by Bento back in 1984 in a different debate against Gewirth, who proposed in the same year an argument similar to the one offered by Griffin. It was a sort of transcendental argument in favor of human rights. He proposed this transcendental argument that says, basically, you cannot help considering yourself an agent. But if you cannot help considering yourself an agent, then you have to endorse the means that allow you to be an agent. Therefore, you cannot refuse the normativity of rights that secure you the things that make you an agent. So it's a transcendental argument because basically human rights turn out to be the conditions of the possibility of being what you cannot deny to be, an agent. So that was Gewirth's answer. That is a little bit different than Griffin, but quite similar in the end. So what is the problem with this transcendental argument in its various forms? Well, even slaves have agency. Even slaves remain agents. And they have to be agents also at a certain degree of development and reached by some education and skills, otherwise they will be worthless. You don't want to have a slave that is a robot. You want to be able to give orders to a slave, otherwise he's useless. Order means do that, and he understands and performs that duty efficiently. In order to do that, he has to be an agent. He remains an agent, even if he is in a condition of slavery. So protecting agency is compatible with allowing slavery. If there is something that is clear, is that slavery is a violation of human rights. So if you focus on agency, you end up with this kind of counterintuitive consequences. So obviously slaves have their human rights violated, hence agency cannot be the foundation of human rights. Now, of course, Griffin is aware of this criticism, and he says, oh, wait a minute, but by agency, I don't mean the agency that a slave has, I mean something better than that, more expanded. I am talking about my agency, if not my agency as a professor at Oxford, at least the agency of a normal person who does a normal life. The problem with that is that it becomes very difficult to set the limits of the goods you need in order to have this minimally good life. So you have a little bit of the threshold, what is called the threshold objections. Where exactly do you draw the line? Below this amount of goods, you are violating human rights. Above this amount of goods, human rights are not violated. So if you if you speak literally about agency as the center of human rights, you have the slave problem. So it's easy to conceive of agency. I mean, if you are given some mentally impairing medicine, you are no longer an agent because your brain no longer controls your body. So it's easy to understand when you stop to be an agent. But of course, human rights cannot be just the protection against medicine that makes you stupid or makes you unable to control your body. That you need more than that. I mean, clearly, human rights protect more than protection from this kind of medicine. When you start seeing more, though, it's very difficult to find to draw a line below which human rights are violated, above which human rights are no longer violated. So, moreover, as I said, human rights intuitively are not rights to a good life, but to a decent one. But who is to say what decency for an entity endowed with agency requires? So that's the first problem of Griffin, that Griffin has, even if he no longer focuses on agency per se, as Gayworth used to do. Another problem with agency-based accounts is that when we think that torture violates human rights, we don't think that the wrong done to the victim has exclusively and perhaps even primarily to do with the deprivation of the victim's agency. I mean, what's wrong with torture is the pain that you cause to the victim. It's not the fact that you make him or her less as an agent as it used to be. So, the problem with torture is not that you cannot move or that you are no longer the master of your life. The problem with torture is the pain that the victim suffers. And pain has really nothing to do with agency. It relates to the protection of other things that are important for human beings that do not seem to have a lot to do with agency. We think that at least part of the wrong of torture has to do with the pain that the victim suffers. Finally, that's the third and final main problem with agency-based accounts, they seem to be committed to the bizarre view that children or mentally impaired people are not entitled to human rights. That's the usual criticism that is raised against Kantian ethics. If you make everything dependent on reason, if you think that the basis of human dignity is reason, what do we do with children or with mentally impaired people that no longer or still do not have or no longer have their full rational capacities? In this case, this objection is translated in the language of agency-based arguments. Since the capacity for proposing action for agency of these categories of people is either not yet developed or permanently lost, it seems to follow that they do not have human rights, and this would be a very bizarre conclusion because, of course, children are the quintessential elements that need protection that human rights perform. And of course, morality, not only morality, but the law in general attribute human rights to these people. Okay, that's the first of the three orientations within instrumentalism. Another instrumentalist account suggests that a plurality of good, as I said, not only one, not only agency, as in the agency-based account, lies at the foundation of human rights. So, for example, John Finnis, neo-scholastic scholar, suggested an allegedly objective list of human goods: life, knowledge, play, aesthetic experience, sociability, friendship, practical reasonableness, and religion. Sikh, I had to put Sikh because it's not a mistake. He thinks that religion is one of the human goods human rights should protected. But of course, what he means is freedom to exercise your religion or to think that it's not necessary to have a religion.
Is it the whole list? Life?
Yeah, that's the
whole
list he
Okay.
has. Life, knowledge, play, aesthetic experience, sociability. Well, it's not very different from the list that Nussbaum has. I mean, she also has a list of capabilities that are important for her. I mean, that she thinks are important to everybody. And Nigel, James Nigel, the founder, as I told you, of the philosophy of human rights, also adopts a pluralist perspective and argues that human rights secure and are thereby justified by four goods: life, the steering of one life, if you want freedom, in the commonsensical way of understanding freedom, avoidance of cruel and degrading treatment, and avoidance of severely unfair treatment. So notice the point about torture. He makes the avoidance of cruel treatment as a distinct good from the steering of one's life, which allows you to say, okay, yeah, torture is a violation of human rights because, not because it violates agency, but because it violates this other important good that I have listed, so the avoidance of extremely cruel treatment. Okay, so also the editors of this excellent collection of essays that I gave to you, Kruf, Liao, and Renzo, are kind of instrumentalists, and also include in the instrumentalist family the position of John Tasiulas. I told you the philosopher who probably spent most of his time speaking of human rights. He's the director of the center at King's College now, and basically he talks about human rights only. So John Tasiulas expands the list of goods protected by human rights to a non-prefixed and determinate list of things that benefit humans. So he thinks, yes, human rights are about protecting goods that are important for human beings, fine. But I'm not going to say which the goods are. I'm only giving you a constraint, a condition to make a certain good a good that should be protected by human rights. What is this constraint? What is this condition? Now, the constraint is that establishing that there is a human right to X should not impose excessive burdens on the corresponding duty bearers. So, if you introduce a human right to holiday with pay for each and every human being, this is going probably to cost a lot of taxes to afford holidays we pay for to every human being on earth that are excessive on people who work, or perhaps they would destroy the economy because the taxes would be too high, and therefore you no longer have an efficient economy because people no longer are motivated to work. If they have to give 80% of their income, well, then it's better to wait for the subsistence that comes from the state, and so on and so forth. So I'm trying to give you an example of a good, which is certainly something that everybody wants, that should not be made into a human right because the cost of providing that good is too high for those who have to pay to offer that kind of good. Whereas the right to vote is not something that has a cost on other people, and you may think that having a decent healthcare system is costly, but not too costly for other people to provide. So for,
No, just one question.
of course, yes.
I think that there are different kinds of human rights. For example, some are stronger than others. Torture and, for example, the holiday
For example?
has a holiday.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about the Norberto Bobbio and Michel Billy. And, for example, Norberto Bobbio says about these different kinds of rights, and Michel Billy says that the human rights promise a lot, and it's this abstract, and they are very there is a critic about this thing, and I would like to say what's your opinion about these writers.
Right. No, it's an excellent point. This is usually called the inflationary tendency of human rights. They tend to grow. We have 4 generations of human rights. We add human rights. We have been adding human rights since the beginning through different generations of human rights. The 4th generation of human rights are human rights of the environment, not of people living in the environment, of the environment itself. So we keep adding human rights, and there is a problem of inflation. Yeah, I mean, it's a very complicated story, because I also think that there are you can have a 3-fold distinction, or maybe 4-fold distinction. You may think that there are things that are to be considered human rights and things that are not to be considered human rights. In the things that are not to be considered human rights, you may include provisions, goods that are protected by liberal democracies. So, for example, we all think that if you live in a liberal democracy, you have the right to be treated as an equal, perfectly, at least from a formal point of view, as an equal to all other citizens. Many philosophers, John Rawls and his followers, think that human rights should not protect you from some form of discrimination, such as if you do not belong to the mainstream culture or mainstream religion, you should be given exactly the same political rights as other people. They think that democracy is not a human right. Perfect equality before the law is not a human right. Of course, they think that you cannot go before a judge and be treated unfairly simply because you are not part of the main community or of the main religious group or stuff like that. No, of course that's a human right. But when we talk about perfect equality, many people think it should not be conceived as a human right. So you may have things that are protected in liberal democracies but should not be protected by human rights. Then within what you may think are human rights, there are things that may be considered as more important than others. So, for example, the violation of some human rights, many people think, could be legitimate ground for intervention and violence on the part of other states to stop a certain government to violate that subset of human rights. So, for example, we are not going to talk about the relationship between human rights and the humanitarian intervention, but the main text about humanitarian intervention today is the so-called responsibility to protect. That is a text available on internet that sets the conditions on which the international community is not just allowed, but kind of required to act against the government, even using military force, in the case of the violation of certain rights, certain human rights, which are genocide, ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity, and another one that I forgot. So these human rights are really the most important, if you want, the most urgent, those that, if violated, legitimize breach of national sovereignty up to the point of a military intervention. Then, below, there are other things that are still human rights, but perhaps justify not such a strong interference, but simply a moral condemnation. So imagine the Secretary General of the United Nations that says, Italy, it's not okay the way you run your prisons. We are not going to invade you for that. But still, I have the right to criticize you not as an individual, but as the representative of the international community to tell you, no, that is wrong. And I don't care if, I'm talking about something that happens within your national territory, it's still wrong. So you may have an articulation of different categories of human rights made according to the legitimate response that the international community may have in case in which these different categories are violated. One of the problems, I don't know if I answered your question or if it helps, but one of the problems, it's good because it allows me to say what's the main problem with Casula's suggestion of leaving this list of goods open, with the only constraints it should not be too costly for the duty bearers. To me, when he came to Catania, I asked precisely the same question. He wasn't very shocked by it, but literally this means that if we are smart enough, I have a student who is writing a dissertation on work. She thinks that the quality of work, not whether you have a job or you don't have a job, but the quality of the job that you have, is something that has been wrongly left outside of the concern of justice. So justice is about distribution of goods, but nobody thinks that justice should also say something about the quality of the job that you do. At most, those who think that the quality of the job matters is going to tell you that you have to be compensated with more money if you do a dirty job or if you do something that is not as good